This is a model of the ancient city of Ephesus. This was a Greek city originally, and then, of course, conquered by, came under Roman rule. This was the harbor area, and this is actually a river which tended to silt up often and often had to be silted out by slave labor. And it would go a few miles off into the Aegean Sea from there. There was a complex of warehouses in this area here. And then there's a marble colonnaded street, which we see there are several of here at Ephesus, and we'll explain those just a little bit later. And then we have the harbor gymnasium and harbor baths, and then we have the theater gymnasium here. Now, let me explain a little bit about gymnasiums. The Romans allowed the Greeks to continue their practice of gymnasiums, although this was not a common thing that the Romans would have done. But there are so many gymnasiums here at Ephesus that we're going to point out. The word gymnasium translates into English, school for naked exercise. And so male Greeks would perform their athletics and preparation of games or whatever in the nude in honor of their gods, which typically were portrayed in the nude. As time progressed, these structures would grow up around the perimeter of these areas, and then schools and academics would be practiced along inside of that. So these were also centers of learning by the time we get to the 1st century AD, in the time period that we're interested in here. You would have had a circus that went into the side of the mountain, the side of the hill here, and again, for chariot races. Here we have a Greek-style theater, and how do you know if a theater is Greek or is it Roman? Well, the Greeks did not perfect concrete, the Romans did. So the Greeks had to build their theaters into sides of hills or into mountains. It made it so much easier to build because they had to actually cut the stone for each piece, so it was much more labor intense. Now, as you move along here, there is another avenue of colonnaded columns here, and then you have an agora here, and then you have a temple to Seriphus. And if you remember, when we looked at the Fayum portraits, there was a priest that was buried there in Egypt of that ancient cult practice as well. Here we have the Library of Celsus, which is probably dates to around 112, 114 AD. And so it was not there when Paul was, but the saints, of course, later would have seen that being built. And here you have the Paetanion, and this is an altar in which a constant flame would be burning for Artemis or Diana, for the temple that was in honor of her there at Ephesus, although we will not see that temple in this model because of the scale. Now, as we move around here, these are referred to as the hillside palaces up in this area. And then you have a series of public baths and latrines. And then you have the fountain/temple of Hadrian in this area. And I always find it interesting that they would put someone's temple next to a latrine. But these streets here are mosaics, and if you go there today, and if you look at the pictures online, and I marked them out here with this white marking so we could see that, but they're just beautiful mosaics as you go up these colonnaded pathways. Now, let me talk about these colonnaded pathways. Once a year, when they would honor the goddess Artemis, they would bring her statue from the harbor area, and they would cover these colonnaded areas and all the way out to the Temple of Artemis, which would go way off in the distance there. If you recall there in Acts 19 is the city official there refers to her image which fell down from heaven. There was a meteor strike, and the Greeks believed that Artemis had come down from heaven there at Ephesus, and that's why it became one of the great centers of the ancient world. Alexander the Great came to Ephesus to worship there. The Temple of Artemis during Paul's day was one of the great seven wonders of the world. And then as you move up in this area, this is referred to as the State Agora. And then this is the Odeon, and it dates to the 2nd century, was built afterwards, and it's built in a Greek style. And it was smaller than the theater, but in this scale, this is the smallest that we could get. And then there is a temple here to Domitian, built in 81 AD, built right after he becomes emperor. I want to point out here, if you look at this temple, there's a series of steps that go up this direction, and there's no steps on either side. That's one way you can distinguish a Roman temple versus a Greek temple. If you think of the Parthenon that is in Athens, it has steps on all four sides going up into it. Romans were very uniform in their thinking, and they liked and preferred one way in and one way out. At Pompeii, the stadium theater there, they discovered it only had one entrance, one exit, and it was the same. And it was called a vomitorium. And so the Romans liked control, and they liked to control the crowds. Temples, the altars typically were in front of the temple structures, no offerings were burnt inside. Temples were used as banks where people put their money. These were areas of commerce. And if you look at Wall Street, if you look at banks in New York, the old banks, they look like temples. And again, that's where it was believed that no one would rob a temple, so they felt that their possessions were safe there. Then this roadway goes on out. Here you have more gymnasiums. Out this direction, the Eastern Gymnasium. And then this road here from the Magnesium Gate would have gone on out to the Temple of Diana or Artemis. And of course, these areas, other areas would have been populated at that time. But that's all I have for this.